very good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all, wherever you're joining in from. On behalf of the Green Hydrogen Organization, I welcome you again to the fourth workshop in the series of 8 workshops that we are running to discuss climate and energy transition finance. We started the workshop series looking at the risks prevailing in the development of green hydrogen economy in India, but many of those risks also apply to energy transition sector as a whole. It was quite interesting to have identified quite a few risks. We now have a list of more than 45 individual risks that have been identified, and all of you are contributing immensely, so I can't thank you enough. And every passing week, more people are suggesting of additional risks that are emerging in their experiences on developing the green hydrogen economy worldwide. The second workshop was focused on how do you stimulate demand, particularly across the hard to abate sectors, whether it's refinery, steel, cement, or fertilizer. We looked at a number of mechanisms. Some are policy, regulatory driven, and others are giving incentives to the market participants. The third workshop focused on where are the pinch points, particularly in development of the renewable energy capacity in the country, and that is fundamental to the development of green hydrogen sector. And by and large, we had concurrence that as much as the understanding and supply side in terms of capital and finance is largely available in the renewable energy sector, but the banking system is going to be deluged with 5x demand on what they have been funding so far. And that kind of capacity does not exist to fund. So we identified in the last workshop about $300 billion that is needed to be brought in to develop the green hydrogen economy, and only up until 2030. So where is that money going to come in from was discussed in the previous workshop. And today we're going to focus on, I think, one of the most important element and aspect of developing the green hydrogen economy, which is the role of a market-making institution and entities. And I'm delighted to have a number of experts with me as lead discussants in today's workshop, starting with Professor Narayan Nayak, who's a professor of finance at London Business School. I had the privilege to be in Narayan's class more than 2 decades ago. So delighted that he taught me something that I could put to good use. So welcome, Narayan. Joining us from Brussels is Rory McRae. Rory is the lead on external affairs and regulatory affairs in Europe for Fortescue Future Industries, and will discuss and present to us the experiences of the Green Hydrogen Bank, or rather the Hydrogen Bank of Europe, and one developed in Germany by the name of H2 Global. Welcome, Rory. Thank you for taking out the time today. And last but not the least, Sumit Chowdhury. Sumit's a founder of Green Earth X, which is developing a global hydrogen trading exchange. A very interesting product concept and a platform that will play a significant role, hopefully, in the development of green hydrogen economy worldwide. So, gentlemen, thank you all, and thank you also to my colleagues joining in from India and Geneva for today's workshop. So to kick off today's session, I'll take about 5 minutes and share with you certain slides to set the context, and then we'll bring in the lead discussants for their expert comments and contributions. What is the role of a market maker? A lot of people think that an aggregator is a market maker, and that's not the case. An aggregator merely collects and and corrals demand, both on buy side as well as ensures their supply side capabilities and capacities aggregated. But there are significant risks involved, which is not the function of an aggregator, which is essentially a function of market making. And as all of us sit in meetings and conferences, the one thing we hear often and time and again is that who's buying green hydrogen? We are making great strides in the acceptance of green hydrogen as a fuel for the future, but also in that the demand is here and now. But we're also hearing at the same time that people and organizations are not giving long-term offtake agreements, whereas for the projects to get funded and reach FID and financial closures, it is essential that there is a long-term 10-year plus offtake agreement available, whereas on the buy side, organizations are giving about 3, 4, maximum 5-year offtake agreements. So how do you kind of bridge this gap? And that's essentially the role of the market maker, which assumes volume risk, temporal risk, delivery, quality, and pricing risks. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And finally, the role of market makers should be cross-sectoral. It is not merely an agency to enable only the large industrial groups. The real purpose of market making is that it is both cross-sectoral and allows and enables participation of all the independent hydrogen producers and others in the market. So from a graphical illustration point of view, here's a kind of a simple, very simplified slide as to what the market maker's function is. So on one side, you will find a market maker engages with suppliers and giving them 10-year plus offtake contracts, and the price discovery is done through a reverse auction. And the lowest bid, of course, wins those reverse auctions. On the demand side, it is aggregating demand and getting into contracts with the various sectors who would typically, as of today, until the market matures, would only offer short-term 3, 4, 5-year bids. And of course, the idea is the highest bid wins. And the difference in the pricing, which we are saying is contract for difference, is then downsold into the market. How is that funded? It's funded through carbon financing, through bond issuances, and any government subsidies that can come and help the market maker perform its duties and functions. So that's essentially the summary of how a market maker works. Now let's kind of lift the hood and deep dive into how that function would be fulfilled. The experiences in Europe are slightly different from what we are proposing for India and any other markets. In Europe, H2 Global has, or rather in Germany, H2 Global has a single entity, single institution backstopped by sovereign funding and other donor funding. Whereas what we are proposing for India or any other market, as a matter of fact, going forward, is that there are market makers, each one kind of catering to the different sector or segments of the market. So ammonia would have a different market maker, refinery sector would have a different market maker, the steel, transport, and other segments would have the same. Now, we're not being prescriptive about whether they should be a separate company or separate entity or a division for the master institution, which a lot of that depends on the depth of that particular sector in the economy we are talking in. So both models are perfectly fine. The ultimate aspect is the master institution carries the bulk of the risk and gives a backstop to all these segments. The segments would bring in sector expertise. Each sector would have slightly different need. Those needs are very differentiated because either the molecule is different. So for instance, in the case of ammonia, it's not green hydrogen, it's a derivative, and methanol is a derivative, whereas in refineries and transport sectors, we'll have the pure molecule of green hydrogen. The demand curves, the demand volumes, the pricing is all very, very different. The counterparty risks are very different in each of those sectors. So rather than creating a melting pot, which will confuse the market participants, particularly the investors, it is better to segment the market making function into different sectors or market segments. So that's how we're proposing the market making function evolves. And just let's look at a single example. Let's say the ammonia division wants to deliver green ammonia to the market. It offers 10-year plus contracts through a reverse auction and start filling the bucket based on the lowest bid, and which is L1, or L2 is the second lowest bid, and so on and so forth. And then it receives two bids at $650 and $700 a ton, whereas the market is local domestic market is at $400 a ton. So who bears the $250 or $300 differential? Essentially, that's the contracts for difference. But the ammonia division is also able to strike a $750 a ton export order, and that particular trade then would be profit making. So the function that the ammonia division is playing is aggregating both supply and demand, and it backends into the master institution. And the master institution's role is to give a backstop guarantee so that these trades can stand on their feet and are commercially viable and enforceable and bankable. And the backstop guarantee, as I said, is provided by the master institution. And of course, the division's role is to also then continuously find other buyers or renew existing contracts when those 3 or 4 year purchase contracts are coming to an end, so that the integrity of the 10-year offtake is maintained. And then finally, the market maker, the master institution, would then place the differential or fund the difference through largely carbon finance. And that's, of course, a very, very big debate that's taking place in the global markets at the moment, with policymakers and multilaterals. But we're recommending that carbon finance should be aggregated rather than distributed down to the individual producers, because then the individual producers are not able to get the price that they could command if they were placing the carbon credits through an aggregated market. What then gets left on the table is then topped up with government subsidies, and finally the balance could be funded through bond issuances, and each bond would be different. We're not suggesting that the master institution creates a melting pot of bonds, because then essentially what will happen is that one sector is cross-subsidizing the other sector, and that's not a good thing for price discovery. So if the steel industry comes together with a collective demand, then that risk parcel perhaps has a AA minus credit rating, whereas an ammonia could have a plus credit rating depending on who the off-takers are. So the pricing on the bonds would be different in the international markets. The sovereign guarantee wraps, as well as development finance institution guarantee wraps, can come in and help reduce the cost of the bond that the market master institution is issuing. So this is how we anticipate the market making function will evolve, should evolve, and of course there are lots and lots of nuances. And with that, I'll just stop here and then invite firstly Narayan, in your experiences of looking at commodity markets globally across the last decade or two, how do you propose the market making on green hydrogen, which is a new commodity, should develop, and who plays what role based on the slides that I've just shown? Are there specific nuances that market participants, the regulators, the investors, and the government should very much focus on? All right, your comments, please.
Thanks, Sanmit. Excellent summary. Uh, I've worked a lot with stocks, bonds kind of markets and commodities to some extent. And here are some common principles that I just want to highlight that Sanmit has covered. Not all may be applicable, but one needs to kind of bear in mind that these are the kinds of things that one needs to take into account. So aggregator to market maker, as you highlighted, the name market maker or the title market maker comes with roles and responsibilities, typically stand ready to make a two-way market in a fair and orderly manner. Yeah. So you have well-known New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, London Stock Exchange, etc. So we are asking a question who that market maker could be. And is that only one market maker like NYSE, there's a specialist, or would that be multiple market makers like NASDAQ or London Stock Exchange or BSE, who will be competing with each other in terms of their bid offer spreads? Usually they'll have the bid for certain unit of hydrogen and ask for people who are selling they or offer. So that is something that we are asking to be fulfilled. Usually for a liquid product with lots of buyers and sellers all over the place, the market is continuous. Yeah, so it opens and then goes, and then trading, of course, will have some intraday patterns, but it is more or less continuous. While for illiquid ones, small stocks, etc., they typically have batch auctions. Yeah, in the morning, in the evening, like for gold and silver, you have London gold price in the morning over a cup of tea. They set it. Subset of people, a certain group of people, maybe 10, 15, whatever, come together. They kind of aggregate the demand supply information that they have and then come up with a London clearing price for gold. Yeah. And in the morning, I'm told, I never attended one, they do it over a cup of tea, but the afternoon one is done over a glass of wine, I'm told, but whatever that may be. So it is batch auctions, which is what is required. And then the market making can be quote-based or order-driven. What I mean by that is quote-based are these market makers posting their indicative bid and offer quotes for certain quantity. If the quantity goes up, of course, it is negotiable. So the exchange or the regulator insists on having some amount at some price you have committed to trade, irrespective of whatever the weather may be. Or like Paris bourse, which is more a order driven market, in the sense, if you see the logo of the His Master's Voice, the kind of a cone with the dog is listening to that speaker. So you have these ask side prices going up and up for large quantity, as the quantity is on the horizontal axis, and you have the prices going up. So small quantities you're willing to sell at 100. In your example, $400 a ton. For large quantity, it may be 550, 600, it'll start going up. And for selling, again, it'll go down. So the greater the quantity, the lower will be the price that you'll get. So there is no mandatory, obligatory market maker on Paris bourse. Yeah. So everybody puts their preferences in terms of at this price I'll buy this, at this price I'll buy this much, etc. So that is a different one. And depending on how the curve looks like, there is an algorithm which will settle it. Like you're mentioning about reverse auction, etc. There are some different types of auctions available. That's possible. So that's one. We know it's a distributed market and geographically dispersed. Yeah. And good thing about this market is there is no limited adverse selection or asymmetric information. What I mean by that is, in case of individual stocks, you might worry that somebody knows more about the company getting some approval or some such drug being passed by a pharmaceutical company. Here, it is more like a macro information. It's more like a government bond rather than an equity, because it's the information is macro nature, policy related, subsidy related, whatever. You don't, nobody has a comparative advantage as to necessarily as to what the policy changes might take place. You might you might project, you might expect certain things, but there are no guarantees there. So you have bond like this, so macro information, and cost wise. Yeah. So in terms of cost wise, you know that the drift is negative. That is, the price is going to come down with technology over a period of time, and that you have to think in terms of how long a contract do you kind of sign, and do you make it then prevailing market based or some adjustment because of price change, or do you keep it fixed as of now? And what the buyer would like is fixed and the seller, but the reality is if the price is going to come down, it's like a used car. The last year's model, it sits in the dealer's room, but as soon as the new model comes up, it drops off price by 15%. So if I know that, Will I be really keen on having the number plate with the latest number? Some people do, but not many people might wait. Yeah. So that is the good thing about this market is there are limited number of players and they are known to each other. Yeah. In the sense, you know who the producers are, who the consumers are. Okay. And there is a repeated interaction. That doesn't happen in stock markets and other markets. Yeah. So if you have an incentive to rip off somebody else with your private information, not rip off, make money out of this. Here, if you find that somebody start acting too smart, then that person could be, disciplined in some way. Okay. In London, they used to call it blacklisting. So if there is somebody who is kind of telling this, then that person goes into the blacklist and the dealer said, my price is too high or I don't want to deal with you. So disciplining mechanism is important for an orderly market, and that can be achieved. Yeah. Usually the bid offer spread covers inventory carrying costs, adverse selection costs, and some required rate of return on your capital and efforts that you put in. Here, the inventory carrying cost will be borne by either the buyer or the seller. I don't, we call it market maker, unless it's a supranational body or a government body which is willing to carry a buffer stock of hydrogen to meet the order demand, which is instantaneous or which is in the short run. Chances are it will be carried by either the producers or the consumers at their warehouses. It's not that the market maker cannot carry it, but it's a bigger commitment that a private sector may not be interested or able to handle. You need a national or a supranational body which is keen on having this to bear that cost or have that capital deployed. Adverse selection or asymmetric information, as I mentioned, is limited, so it's not a real worry as such, but we will still have to keep an eye. Then we are talking about who pays the market maker or who pays the intermediary facilitator. In the US real estate market in the USA, is the seller who kind of pays the real estate agent, and that commission is shared. So we need some economically viable mechanism for the aggregator or the intermediary or the platform provider to make it economically viable for that party to stay in business. Yeah, so that is certain required rate of return is expected to cover their cost of doing that. Now, then the question arises as to how often would you do this batch auctions or market clearing? Are you talking about once a day, twice weekly, or weekly, fortnightly? How frequently do you really need it? Yeah, because if the information doesn't change much and your demand is projected reasonably for a medium term, you know how much that is, then you may be able to do the trading or market clearing at a certain times. I'm not saying once a month or once a fortnight, but maybe bi-weekly or even daily, possibly. So, and that may be a short meeting, a short time commitment. It's not going to run from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. kind of clearing. So that's possibility. The product is such that there is some seasonality. If it's used as a heating fuel type of function, then you will have some, winter season versus summer season. Not as much as corn, wheat, and other kind of this, but more like fuel oil type of seasonality might come in to play, and that has some implication in terms of backwardation, contango, those kinds of things. Finally, a couple of things. You talked about cash settled in terms of CFD, contract for differences. It has some merits, but cash settled doesn't solve the problem of the physical producer or consumer. Let me say the following. In 2008, there was a huge price rise in Middle East for food and agricultural products, which got coupled with general inflation. And then they realized, some standard solution was, why don't you go to Chicago and buy some futures contracts and that will cover the cost. But the cost doesn't allow you to buy the food because the food production, if it's not done. And that's when Saudi and Qatar and few other big countries there bought land in sub-Saharan Africa to ensure supply of agri products, sugar, rice, cocoa, whatever that might be. So we need to think about what can be achieved by CFD and cash settled, while for certain commodities, it is delivery. Unless you exit the contract or switch out and somebody else takes your position. And in this hydrogen, it looks like delivery is important. And you might have initial margin for the buyer and the seller, maintenance margin, just the way we have for futures contracts, to honor the integrity of your expression of interest and the contract that you have signed. And the market maker then will have to stand ready. If you don't put up the margin, which you go bankrupt, whatever that is, they reassign it to somebody else. So the default halfway through, you're talking about 5-year contracts. Who knows which company will be in business after 5 years? So that's that. And the last part was about your reverse auction. There are two main types of auctions. Everybody knows. One is called sealed bid first price auction, okay, which has the winner's curse. So you get congratulations, you got the contract or order, but hey, you paid X amount more than the second highest bid. Okay, so, and if you know that there is winner's curse associated with it, then you don't bid as much. Yeah. And the second is called sealed bid second price auction, or those kind, or open outcry second price auction, the one that you see in movies where they put the hand up saying, 100,001, is there a buyer? Where you're essentially paying the second highest bidder plus epsilon. Yeah. So you have to ask a question as to what kind of an auction mechanism, if you were to go down that route, that you will be effecting. And you can have a discriminatory pricing even in reverse bid, or you can have a market clearing pricing. What I mean by that is the highest bidder says, okay, I have this quantity at this highest bid. Then the second highest bid will have this quantity. And at certain point, the market clearing takes place. The supply equals demand. Now, the question is, do you ask the person who has bid the highest to pay his or her own highest bid, or do you ask everybody to pay the market clearing price, to be fair to everybody? So those are the kinds of nuances you will have to think about, and there are well-known auction mechanism results. So those were the main things that I was talking about. And the last philosophical note, I would say, having a market maker, is it like climbing Mount Everest, or is it like climbing Mount Kailash? Mount Everest is difficult, but it has been done and can be done. Mount Kailash, forget it. Yeah, it's not possible. So let me leave it at that. If it was possible, it would have been done by this time. Over to you back, Sanmit.
Great. Thank you, Narayan. I'll start with responding to the philosophical. We don't have a choice, Narayan. We have to climb Mount Kailash, right? or we would not survive as humanity. Difficult as that may be, there are, as you very rightly point out, there are enough parallels around the world, whether it's food commodity, oil commodity, silver or gold. There are enough parallels that we can draw upon to establish this market function. The mechanism of auctions, of course, is a matter of detailing, and perhaps we can set up another call or a meeting to discuss that in what works and what doesn't work. But I think the two couple of main points that I took away was essentially the price discovery, right? So because the number of participants are limited, the asymmetry in the information is unlikely, right? Everyone would know what the prevailing price is. Of course, there's a danger of cartelization, and that's where the government or the whoever is establishing the master institution should have its own mechanisms of price discovery, that what the prevailing cost of production, cost of delivery, cost of storage of green hydrogen or any of its derivatives is actually is. So no one can actually game the market, and that's what you said, that asymmetrical information causes gaming of the system, right? The adverse selection point that you raised was also quite interesting, which essentially translates to, is there what's the guarantee of delivery, right? Have I chosen the wrong set of players, and will they be able to deliver the product or not, in time or not? So I guess that's why the institution's role would be to not create an over concentration risk, as was discovered in the last workshop we had, that the lenders are saying there's an over concentration risk on the number of market participants. So we need to go down the food chain as well and get as many players to come forward as possibly can in the limited period in time. And of course, the most important bit is communicating the price discovery to the other players, and I think that's very, very critical in the establishment of this particular entity or institution. So those are some of the key points that I took away. Of course, there's a lot more, and we'll come back to you, Narayan, during the discussion as we get into it. So thanks for your opening remarks. Can I now bring in Rory? Rory, from what you've seen and heard from myself and Narayan, how do you correlate our particular suggestions vis-a-vis what's happened in Europe already and the experiences of both Fortescue and other market participants with the GH2 global auctions and the development of the Hydrogen Bank for Europe? Rory, that would be very, very interesting to hear from you. So welcome again, and over to you.
Try and provide a European outlook, which is, I think, maybe a sort of special case environment. And I just say, first of all, that I'm very impressed by the presentations that have come before me. You're clearly both great financial and market experts. It's very much not my background. I'm sort of quite hands-on in the policy arena here in Brussels. But I've been privileged to sit through a number of the workshops at H2 Global, at the European Hydrogen Bank, along with colleagues, and see about the formulation of the policies. So it's really quite practical here in a sense. In Europe, we are trying to make a market for green hydrogen based on the desire to decarbonize and the legal instruments that are mandating this. So unlike places like the US, where, as you know, there's the US Inflation Reduction Act and a lot of money that is available to decarbonize in a push mechanism, we rely in Europe a little bit more on the stick more than the carrot. So there are policy mechanisms that are mandating a certain amount of uptake for certain industries, notably heavy industries, Renewable Energy Directive, and transportation. And the problem then becomes, how are these industries going to have to decarbonize, and how will they use green hydrogen if they're mandated to do so? That means that these auctions become also quite political and controversial in terms of the access to the funding for sectors which are mandated to change. And one of the things that we have seen is long arguments in the European Hydrogen Bank over which sectors should have preferred or preferential access to these funds. Because if we think about the objectives of, let's say, the European Hydrogen Bank, it's really about supporting the creation of a domestic market, and the word market is important there. You've alluded to it. It's about international imports to the EU as well, to create more liquidity. It's about the transparency and coordination of market developments, and then also streamlining existing financial instruments. So the question is really, how do we bridge this green premium gap that is required with fossil fuels, with the fossil competitors of those who are mandated to shift to green production? And how do we get the money to bridge that gap? And then we get to infrastructure and other issues. Now, H2 Global and the European Hydrogen Bank are coming from slightly different perspectives, and they are maybe moving in similar directions, but there are different reasons for that. H2 Global has a first mover advantage because it is set up by the German government, sort of one single government, that knows very well that it needs imports of green hydrogen as part of an integrated strategy to provide it for its heavy industry, which needs to decarbonize as part of those targets. That has resulted in a double auction mechanism. The reason for that is largely the need to get past the European Commission's competition arm. Everything in Europe is about Europe, as you well know, and therefore what is required is not to disadvantage other European countries. And therefore the state aid, the funding that will be provided to bridge this gap, has to be provided on a competitive basis. Hence the market auction on the producer side, and also the market auction on the buyer side. And the aim here is to structure it between to get a long-term offtake for the producers who need the funding. That has been set at 10 years. and then a shorter time frame and create some more liquidity in the market making that you alluded to on the buy side, which I think is set at 3 years. Well, I'm not sure. I can't quite remember, I'm afraid. There was a cap of 7 years that was set for state aid reasons. And that was distributed with an envelope of 950 million euros and distributed between 3 separate sectors, which is for ammonia, for methanol, and for eSAF, with additional funding coming online, for different ones of those. And that, I think, reflects a desire on behalf of the German government to see different sections of the industry having funding directly available. In Europe, domestically, it's slightly different. So we've had one auction that has taken place. We have not seen the result of that auction. And to be honest, we did not bid in that auction, although we gave extensive feedback to the T's and C's as part of the consultation. The reason that we did not bid in that is that the auction design, the conditionality was so strict for producers because of the need to have a success. One of the conditions was the requirement that the producers already have direct prior experience of producing and handling green hydrogen. Now, that pretty much excluded most new market entrants and left it with the super majors and the gas specialty producers. However, this is very much a pilot auction from the perspective of H2 Global. The feeling in the market was that it was necessary to get something out there and to make it happen in order to drive the market forward. And although we didn't take part, we are very much in favour of the whole process and the development. And we are donors and part of the organisation H2 Global. And so we very much welcome it. And part of what this has done is to drive the procedure at European level. So if I just move from H2 Global, which is really about imports for German industry, or if I just add just a little bit to it, that some of the lessons that we have seen there was, as I mentioned, first of all, that conditionality, which is excessively restrictive and will likely be loosened in future rounds. Secondly, the producer industry, of course, wanted to have longer offtake contracts so as to finance the projects. And on the demand side, we have seen a slight shift from initially, certainly some of the parties we were talking to who were very keen to have longer offtake contracts to finance their decarbonization journey. But since Ukraine war and the uncertainty and risk that's increased, we've seen maybe a bit more appetite for short-term contracts, and we've certainly seen a desire for more flexibility. Now, when we look at the European Hydrogen Bank's domestic leg, which is for contracts only within Europe, which can, of course, still be international, the feedback that came in the first round of consultations was very clear, was that there was a desire for direct contracts, which was also some of our feedback to H2 Global, a desire for purchasers and vendors to be able to get together and bid together to finance the gap directly, to remove complexity, to keep things as simple as possible and to try and get something happening quickly. And it was also clear that whilst a very strong requirement for the Commission was price discovery and to try and understand where the price in the market was, in terms of the industry, it was quite likely that there's going to be a certain amount of co-location of projects and a smaller, less liquid, and probably quite lumpy markets in some ways. I mean, we've seen that one of the first FIDs was Shell with, I think, High Holland co-producing, so co-locating the production and the use of the product. And the lack of infrastructure within Europe for hydrogen means that the market is very much dependent upon infrastructure and upon offtake. These physical realities are incredibly important. And we are very much talking about a real market that has to get off the ground and that will have to develop over years before it becomes more liquid. Now, the European Hydrogen Bank, whose first domestic auction will take place on the 23rd of November, has an envelope of 800 million euros only initially, funded by the Innovation Fund at EU level. This is only for production and offtake within the EEA. It is not limited to certain sectors, and there has been a lot of discussion and within the workshops on the design about who should have access to this, with various sectors, for example, the hard-to-abate sectors, reminding the Commission that as they are mandated to switch to green hydrogen, they should have preferential access. But at the end of the day, the Commission preferring to keep the auction completely open so as to be able to price discover whereabouts the greatest willingness to pay is and where it sits between the demand and the producers. This, I think, is a very important aspect, and we are reminded again and again that this is a pilot auction from the Commission. There are likely to be announcements coming soon, and there are likely to be changes. And again, this is funded on the through a grant system. It's quite a limited amount, and the question is again, where will the money come from? How will larger volumes of funds be made available? Because the existing amounts are already quite small. And in this respect, I think at EU level, it is harder to be creative. One of the main concerns that we have seen amongst off-takers and people and also producers is in this initial round, the inability to stack credits and subsidies with the auction. So if you're taking part in the Hydrogen Bank auction, you cannot already have EU funds. And this doesn't help to close the gap, which is really quite significant. There's a maximum bid of, I think, €4 a kilo for a 10-year period for the European Hydrogen Bank. And this is because the people holding the purse strings in DG Klima want to understand exactly which parts of the value chain need to be de-risked and where the subsidies are required. There is a feeling that there's already a certain amount of subsidy washing around the system in the European subsidy system, and they want to understand exactly how to make it work. It is not impossible that in future rounds, it might, for example, be possible to itemize existing subsidies that have been allocated under IPCEIs through domestic state aids or through other European funding schemes such as the Innovation Fund, itemize those on a euros per kilo basis and subtract that from the bid. And the final thing that I would just say around both frameworks is that there is a desire to use them as a framework to attract further types of funding. So at the moment, H2 Global has funding from the German government, and it is opening that up. It has to the Netherlands and to Belgium. And there is the possibility, there are discussions to open these funding windows more widely. There are discussions with UAE, there are discussions with the US and Australia that I'm aware of, whereby those countries could fund the window and then they would be able to determine the terms and conditions, which at the moment are only for European green hydrogen under the Delegated Act, but it could potentially be for low carbon hydrogen or other types. And then on the European Hydrogen Bank side, they are pushing the design under the so-called auction as a platform mechanism, meaning that individual member states could open windows to fund hydrogen projects on their own soil. One of the issues being that member states are relatively reluctant at this stage to put money into a pooled EU kitty where they may not feel that they actually receive the benefits themselves. So the political aspect of where the money comes from and who it goes to is ever present in Europe, and one of the issues is going to be sort of most important. That's probably enough at this stage. I'm not sure if that's too detailed or too broad, but it's just what I've seen over the last 6 months to a year, and looking forward to throwing it into the mix.
Great, Rory. Thank you so much. And I picked up 3 points from your narration of what's happening in EU. Again, taking the last one, the political aspects of how individual member states could use the platform of auctioning almost as a service, but are reluctant to put capital into a pot. And India is somewhat created in the same way, where you have the federal structure and the state structure, right? States creating their own incentives and subsidy mechanisms to attract the development of green hydrogen on their respective soils. So a similar dynamic could play out. What I found most interesting is the fact that both H2 Global and the Hydrogen Bank for Europe are trying to open funding windows to other countries. This perhaps is most profound and important for countries such as India and others in the global south, that, you know, the biggest elephant in the room, we're still talking who funds. And unless we start tapping globally into the institutional money markets and capital markets, which have crossed 100 trillion of assets under management, we're not going to be able to finance carbon at all, right? So there's very little money going around, and the demands on those monies, as all of us know, due to global volatilities and other systemic risks, is increasing. The balance sheets are coming under severe strains already. So creating mechanisms for money markets and institutional capital to partake in the development of energy transition projects and green hydrogen, this could be a very interesting way. And as I've illustrated in my example, that certain bonds could be issued. Not everything is a grant. Grant is a jump starter, kickstarter, but is not going to be enough. If I just say, let's take India's example of 5 million tons of green hydrogen production per annum is the goal by 2030. Even if the government says, look, we are going to incentivize, subsidize, and support in whatever mechanism, let's say 1 million tons per annum of market making, and the rest you leave the participants to their own devices. And at a $2 differential, you're looking at 2 billion a year, right? $2 a kilo differential. So 2 billion a year is significant sums of money for the country to and it does not want to do that, make that commitment ad infinitum. You mentioned 7-year cutoff, and I think that's a good runway for all market participants to say that this tapering effect will kick in, and you have the support available for the next 7 years. So that's a very interesting point that you also mentioned. And finally, I think it'll be very crucial who should get access and preferential treatment to accessing that money. And that's why we've said that rather than sectors cross-subsidizing each other, and then you get caught up in bureaucratic processes and hurdles, each one should determine their own market dynamics, with the master institution giving a backstop facility to everyone, as if each child is equal, right? You're not going to give preferential. And then, of course, those that are not able to attract capital or the necessary demand are the ones that need to be then supported. So the master institution's role is quite important. So Rory, these are the points that I took away from your early narration, and we'll come back to you during the Q&A. Thanks, Rory. And finally, can I invite Sumit Chaudhary? Sumit, you are building a very exciting platform. So tell us a little bit about that, but mostly in the context of perhaps the key role that your platform will play is price discovery and giving not just the current spot prices, but most importantly, the forward curves that everyone needs when they're making their commercial decisions on whether to buy or not, and how the price changing will affect the current contracting. So, Sumit, welcome again, and over to you.
The first question that you had asked me, if you remember, Sanmit, is when I was presenting the idea to you, that was I going to be a market aggregator or a market maker? I think that was how our conversation started. But before I go into my my definition of what we are doing, I mean, one of the things that you just mentioned was the Indian government's subsidy scheme, and that's not $2. I mean, they have already come out with about 40 cents over a 3-year period, not 7. So, and I don't think that.
Sumit, I didn't say the government's giving the subsidy. I'm saying $2 is the current differential that needs to be bridged, right? Subsidy is a small subset of that, right?
Yeah. So and it's going to be far less than 2 billion. I mean, right now on an annual basis. So I think it needs to be bridged. And the role that we see from a market aggregator, as you said, is the price discovery, displaying the prices, getting the trade data, making sure that the liquidity providers have a centralized platform on which they can find prices, trade prices. And the idea is not just the delivery of the hydrogen molecule. It is also about the forwards, which is essentially bi-directional contracts between two people, and it has a set of risks that go along with the futures. I mean, in the forwards contracts, and then futures is where you trade this on a daily basis, where you don't take delivery. So I think we have to look at this problem in two ways. One is the market aggregator and the market maker, and as today's discussion is about, market aggregators are going to not participate in the trade, and market makers are going to provide that liquidity and provide the both buy sell and be able to facilitate the trade and be able to stand by that price to buy when they commit to the buy market. So it takes a lot more capital to be the market maker in this, and none of the examples that we are seeing today in the market are going down the path of being the market maker per se, and be able to stock up and be able to deliver when required. One more player that we see will come into this whole thing are storage players. They would probably have a propensity to be the market maker. They will be able to get the suppliers to provide it to them and provide the stability that the market requires over the period of time. So at Green Earth X, we started off by looking at this problem, not just a regional problem, but at a global level. We realized that the buyers and the sellers are in different geographies and they don't know each other. Just to contradict a little bit about Professor Narayan's comment about the buyers are limited and they know each other. In this particular hydrogen market or the derivatives of hydrogen market, there are new players who have never been in this business before. There are new sellers and new buyers. Both don't know each other. And that is one big role that a market aggregator will provide at a global level. And because the producers of pollution who need to get the hard to abate industries, the people who need the carbon credits, who need the hydrogen, are in certain geographies disproportionately more than locations where we are going to find the solutions to decarbonization, where we are going to find cheaper sources of power, cheaper sources of land, and cheaper sources of technology to produce the solutions to this hard-to-abate industry. So this required the problem to be looked at a global level. And that is where we decided to focus our efforts, is to create a global platform, but allowing these platforms to be disaggregated, like Sanmit mentioned, that you don't need to bring everybody into one pot and try to find one global price. We will find differences in pricing based on the production cost and based on the subsidy schemes in those markets, based on the availability of finance in those markets. We are going to find differences in geographies, like in Africa or in Asia or Europe. And South America, we are finding a lot of differences in how people are structuring their thing. There are local rules and regulations which are going to be different in these markets. So we can't necessarily create one global platform which everybody has to come into. So we created a disaggregated commerce platform that we are going to deploy across multiple geographies. Technology of that platform, as you said, that the auction as a platform. I think Rory, you mentioned auction as a platform. We should be able to do that in terms of trading as a platform across multiple geographies, and letting these geographies define their rules, their regulations, their price contracts, their mechanisms, and also the currencies. What we are seeing from a global currency market and de-hedging policies across the world, we see multiple currencies coming up today to be used for trading and also settling these contracts and delivery contracts especially. So we have sort of divided the whole concept into a delivery market focused entity, which will ensure that the contracts are tight, and we are able to get two people to agree on a standard contract between two geographies, and so that they are able to deliver. And because these are being used in a process industry, we can't have a discontinuity in the delivery, as was mentioned by all the participants, that this needs to happen every day. So we will come to a point where we will need to trade on the spot prices, and the people who are going to be able to deliver very quickly at that spot price at the date would probably be people who are in the storage industry. So we are seeing a new category of market players of hydrogen storage or birthing companies who will come in and create that market making facility. And if I take a look at why do we need the forwards curves, as you mentioned, Sanmit, is essentially to ensure that this price risk management is taken care of. And the hydrogen prices have been volatile. People have not been able to discover it. It is fairly opaque bi-directional forwards contracts, and we don't have too many of them. So finding those numbers, making sure that some of these auctions are creating those numbers, making them available, and making them available at a global level. And as Rory mentioned, that Europe is working towards everything that is Europe, but the problem is global, and we need to ensure that we are able to take this. And finally, investment decisions about hydrogen production, about the distribution and the investment required in the infrastructure and technology, the price forwards contracts are going to be very, very essential to be structured right up front. Maybe not the spot one, but over the next 3 years, we are going to see a lot of development in the forwards contracts between two people. But then it will start getting traded maybe in the next year and a half in a way of futures contracts, and which can be traded every day on the exchange and which has a price. And we will see many of these forward contracts being traded later on in the market. So that's the portability of these contracts is what we are going to be able to provide. And finally, I would say, amongst many other things, we are talking about green hydrogen. So what is green? How do you certify? How do you get the certification standards stabilized across the markets, or standardized or normalized across the markets? And you need technology for that. And that's the second layer of our technology platform, is to create the normalization between the certification regimes that are going to be there. And we will work with all the other certifiers, not just us. We will definitely provide the certification engine and the certification services in many markets, but we will work with the existing certification policies that are there, the companies that are there that have already solved this problem. There is absolutely no point in reinventing the wheel over there in terms of the thing. Now, if I take a look at the larger futures and forwards contracts, the contract negotiations today, if I take a look at the auctions that we're doing, each of them are taking months to get to. Today, any of these contracts take a long time to figure out what the pricing is and trying to get the nuances of auctions or nuances of price discovery. But if we can get it to a standard contract, if we get it to an accepted way of doing business between multiple parties, we will find that getting them on an exchange, getting them to be on a traded platform will close the business faster. And when you close the business faster, the velocity of the industry increases and the velocity of funding increases. I think that's what our target is. How do you get the velocity of funding into this economy, into this hydrogen economy right now, and provide a risk-adjusted return for the investors in this field. And once they start seeing these forward contracts, once they start seeing how they are trading over time, and this will take at least the next 2 to 3 years to get to a point where we are going to see this risk-adjusted returns, and the market transparency will allow this to happen over time. Now, market signals that we are going to be able to provide will allow bigger investments to come in. Only people who have got a complete faith today, there's only a couple of players who have, and mostly in China, who have talked about and have started working on there's gigawatt plants in the hydrogen space. Now, if you take a look at the other 90% of the others, you will not find people actually building those plants. They are not committed to so far. I'll stop now in terms of discussing the need for the futures market. I think that's fairly evident to everybody on this call. Pricing indicators obviously are going to come from a lot of places initially, but over the next 6 months, we hope that we become one of the providers of the market data for these exchanges, for brokerage platforms, for government agencies. We are working with several industry associations to bring their members onto this, the larger group across the world. And we think that this the stabilization of cross-industry association feeding of information will actually stabilize the market to some extent. And we will provide the platform for making it happen. We will sign up with APIs into the commodities exchanges. We'll provide the third-party analytics platforms to allow traders to compare what is going on in different markets, and also provide that arbitrage that will be required between markets. Be able to buy and sell and deliver the molecules as well in different markets, because the transportation industry is also going to be a major player, trying to get their cost aligned with the market that we are seeing over here. So I'm seeing a lot of players who are all interested in getting this information or participating in it, because the more just like any other network theory, the more the players in the network, the more stable the network is. And one of the ways we are doing it very different is not to become the monopolistic provider of this technology. We are building it on a platform which is open source. We are going to ensure that we are creating an open network for hydrogen commerce, and we will allow other exchanges and other things to tap into our larger network of players in there. Very similar to what we are doing here in India for the ONDC platform. We are taking the same protocol, creating it at a global level, and be able to let other exchanges benefit from the larger market information that we are going to provide. Plenty of regulatory hurdles that obviously are there. I think that is something that we are looking into. For the frameworks are different. We have seen Europe obviously far ahead in terms of coming up with all kinds of. Nobody knows what the real stable environment is going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now, but we know for sure that everybody is learning. and everybody is moving quite fast in this space. And having a platform which allows us to code these frameworks, allows for normalization of these frameworks, would be essential.
Thank you, Sumit. And like with the others, I picked up a few key points. You mentioned normalization of standards and standardization of contracts. So the green hydrogen organization is very much working on those two fronts, and we've done some stellar work. So I urge everyone to look into work on those aspects. But I think the most important two most important points that you made is that storage players will perform a crucial role. In one of the earlier workshops, Steve from Asian Development Bank mentioned the need for government to create that storage capacity more from an energy security standpoint, but it could play a double bill, that storage as an investment, and the point that was made earlier, who finances, I think Professor Naik made that point, who funds the commercial strength of the market maker, and I think storage itself could deliver those returns. And if government chooses to invest in storage as opposed to giving grants, you not only cover the cost of the market making function, but you also get the energy security priced in as well. So that's a very, very interesting point, something we should dwell on further. And finally, what are those risk-adjusted returns? The market making function should also give price signals on the return to the investors and not just the price of hydrogen. So those are some interesting points, Sumit, that you brought up. Thank you for your contribution, and we'll come back to you during the discussion. I've now been informed that Michelle Halleck from the World Bank is able to join us. Michelle, thank you for coming on board. Michelle was previously with H2 Global and is now in the market making function within the World Bank. So welcome, Michelle, and perhaps quick remarks from you on what you've heard from the other participants so far.
I'd like to raise three different points. I guess try to change a little bit the perspective. I hope it's food for thought. The first part is related where comes from this the main inspiration of the market making that we are proposing most of the hydrogen environmental sphere. It comes from the power market. So what Professor Narayan said about the amount and the philosophical question in electricity, that was something almost impossible to think. That was how to market with electrons. We did it in somehow. So it's as you said, it's something that it's not easy. We need to design, need to be careful design, but in somehow the inspiration come from that, and also come from the development of the natural gas market, right? The natural gas, it was started as bilateral contracts. It was basically based on netback pricing, and it aims to substitute oil. And then it was developed the natural gas hubs and the natural gas market and the indicators and etc. So I guess a little bit, I believe this experience can be useful to us, even if you know that the hydrogen is different. And one of the key difference on hydrogen is the gap. There is a gap between what people is willing to pay and what people is the cost, the production cost. So this is one of the huge difference we have. And to build this market, we need to consider how we'll be covering this gap, but also how will be match these two players. So when I saw your proposal, one of the elements that come to my mind is that when you separate the market, you facilitate it in somehow, in the sense that you make the contracts as they are less simplified, they are more specific. It's easy in some way for the market entering. And when you discuss with stakeholders, we see that there is a claim to have simple things because hydrogen is already too complex. So people say, okay, let's try to do it as simple as possible. And I understand that. The question is that when you do that, you have two drawbacks. One, you're doing a less liquid market because you have the number of players decrease. And the second one, there is something that's really important for when you're doing the market, and it has been really important for Europe, and Rory mentioned as well, is that we need to define who has the willingness to pay this extra cost. And when you separate the market, you are not letting the market define who has the most willingness to pay. And when you do that, it's the market does not give you information or enough information about the best way to allocate subsidies or other forms of support. So I guess this is a drawback related to this kind of thing. So, and the third point, I guess I'd like to do, it's when you talk about contracts of difference, because the inspiration, if I understand well, it comes from power market. And the idea is that we have something that you are variating. So we don't know exactly how much how much the premium need to be. So it's why we put, you say, okay, you pay the difference between the price, the strike price, and the other commodity price. And it's a great idea. The question is when you talk about hydrogen, you don't have a hydrogen market. You don't have a gray hydrogen market. You may have some regional markets that you can use, but if you talk about international price or international indicator, it does not exist. So maybe what we could think when you talk about international level, you may relate this indicator with some other price. For instance, it could be something you have been thinking. I personally have been thinking with some colleagues. It's about natural gas. It could be used as an indicator when you do the difference for the contract of difference in some place. There is opportunities there, and also you have some drawbacks as everything. And one of the things we need to have in mind, it's a little bit the size of the market, how much you want to increase the market, and how much where you'll be willing to cover this gap. So some industry, this gap may be higher. Some industries, this gap may be lower, smaller. So how you be comparing this to allocate efficiently the money? So this is the ideal market, and also thinking about international and local, so that there is some specificities. And on the other hand, so thinking on this process, maybe we should think about a kind of a modular or step-by-step process that we should be looking forward to have an international market, an international price, but you are in a place where you don't have any price. So how will you be doing on this process from one step to the other, but also looking what we want to reveal, because it was something that the Professor Narayan also mentions, that what we want to reveal here. We want to reveal costs, but maybe you want to reveal willingness to pay, and how people or how the different potential users are value the cleanness of the hydrogen, and how you to be related with the carbon pricing. And so this is the kind of information that we want to review when you do this market. And the only question I bring here, and I guess we need to consider, even if in this moment we want a simple and thing, so is if you are cutting too much the market and specifying too much everything in the market, the information is in the design of the market and not come from the market itself. So you may be losing some information. So just some elements for food for thought. And thank you very much for.
Thank you, Michelle. And just I think point on this clarifying. Whilst we are suggesting that the market may be segmented, but that's only to simplify the contracting and understand the sector nuances. There is an aggregator at the top, and that aggregator kind of gives the backstop financial muscle to each of the subsectors. So in our design, what we are saying that the sectoral nuances, sectoral differences can come from a division. It doesn't have to be a separate entity, a division of the market, much like how ETFs function, right? So exchange traded funds would have a basket of currencies, commodities, and securities. So the institution will create a basket, and each one will have a slight different nuance. But you also highlight that the market making actually has a dual function in not just price discovery, but also the investor discovery, that who's willing to pay it at what price. So that's I think it's come out. Every speaker has said that element. You had a point, Michelle.
Yeah, I just want to mention that when you do the power market, we have a little bit the same for renewables. When you do the auctions for renewables, we had the same discussion, because somehow we want to say, okay, you do some specifics for different wind, solar, or this kind of different, or you do something general. When you define the market, you do it separated for technology specific, you are already define the share somehow of this. So this is the kind of information we are giving. And in the beginning, many markets did in this way. But what we see is that after, the best thing it was to evolve, or you are still seeing that, but in the market that becomes more mature, to be able, the market be able to give information about the basket of this technology. So it's why I guess when you separate it by the design, even if it have an aggregator, you are giving information that the market could give you if they are a little bit more mature in somehow.
Sure. No, point well noted, and I think that has to play out very strongly when the markets are being designed. So thank you for highlighting that, Michelle. Couldn't agree more with you.
Just to come back on, maybe a last word on that, segmentation, or who are you sending it to? It's been clear that some of the sectors that have the highest willingness to pay. We've seen that the tech sectors in Europe with data centers willing to pay because they have the money, and sectors like the steel or others saying, hang about, we need to decarbonize. This is for us. And then Hydrogen Europe coming in and saying, well, hang about, because if these people can actually pay and get it off the ground and get the electrolyzers funded, then that is what we needed to get this chain of value created in order to have the liquid markets that are needed for steel and others down the line. So just to make clear that what we're really seeing is this importance of getting things off the ground initially, and then all the talks about futures and liquid global traded markets, which we're very, very keen on, but we have to get there, and we really have to get over the first hump first. And we could not do any of this, in fact, until we had a definition of green hydrogen in the European Union with these famous delegated acts. And restrictive as they are, without that, you do not have a price, because you do not know what you are creating, and the buyers do not know what they are buying. So the certification angle that's also referred to is a crucial part of it as well. All these things have to be seen together and come together. But I'm really impressed by India's enthusiasm for this. And the volume and the drive and the intellectual and emotional capital that is being brought to this great project. So I want to congratulate the Green Hydrogen Organization for the work, which I know you're doing not just in India but globally. It's really important, and all the other speakers. Thank you.
Rory, thank you so much, and take those points. And your last message is get things moving, and perfection will follow. Right? So. Function over form is the message. So thank you, Rory, for your time and contribution today, and we'll see you again very soon. I'll open it up to the floor. I don't want to hog all all the airtime.
Yeah, okay. Let me say a few comments. These storage players and transportation players forming the role or picking on major functions of market making. The question, and Michelle correctly highlighted it, the liquid natural gas providers, storers and transporters are the nearest to green hydrogen. The cryogenic requirements are different, but you have to realize that the storage capacity and the transportation is a very specialized uh, industry. Yeah? And then the question arises as to what is the second best use of it if you're not using it for hydrogen. Yeah? For example, Eurotunnel that we built between France and UK, there is no second best use. The only use is a tunnel. So the more versatile it is to redeploy, the more quicker that will develop. So, and Sanvit, you are mentioning that up to 18% of green hydrogen or hydrogen can be mixed with LNG. So that looks like the colonial cousins or closest brothers kind. Back to you, Michelle.
I really like the point you do, because actually when you think about this definition of a practical market, I think the idea of the hub, the infrastructure hub, it's really important, because you need to be able to trade gas, to trade hydrogen. That's a gas as well, let's say. So I guess it's really important to think about what can be mixed. And when you see some market makers like Portugal in Europe, it's really interesting, because what they are doing is that to include, they are buying, they are obliging hydrogen, the pipeline, the gas pipeline, to buy hydrogen and to mix. This is a way to do with putting it inside of the regulated consumption tariff, which there are some problems there as well. But that's the idea of this hub that also have been discussed in India and many other places. It's really important to go together. The infrastructure hub that allows some transfer of hydrogen need to go with the potential of contract and pricing.
Sure, definitely. One small observation, the thing about green versus pink versus gray versus brown hydrogen. In commodities markets, we have Kansas wheat trades at a different price compared to some other wheat because of the quality. Here, the quality is the same of green hydrogen atoms, but the way it is produced will have a penalty tariff sort of on top of it. So there are some parallels, though you can't define what is pure green versus when does it become pink, when does it become gray, when does it become brown. But over a period of time, it would be, and you guys mentioned about certifying as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And there's a question for you. What's your definition of liquidity for the hydrogen market? Is it by volume or by number of market participants, or just about clearing rates? Any examples of historic trends from other traded commodities would help.
Liquidity is there are two most elusive words in finance. One is called the alpha, the value added by the manager, and the second is liquidity. So it's very difficult to precisely define, what liquidity is, and it depends on the product, depends on the industry, depends on the players, depends on lots of things. So we would like it as fair and orderly market, as frequently traded, as continuous as possible, but that is not. There is no like the tables of hydrogen, helium, this that we have. What do we call it? Mendeleev's table or whatever that is, for periodic table. We don't have definitions like that. It's all relative to, of course, the US Treasury market is the most liquid. We don't expect green hydrogen to be like that. But at the same time, it'll evolve over time. That I'm not shunning that question. We just don't have answers to those questions. Over a period, depending on the players and how many they come in, there is a generally accepted consensus that, okay, this seems reasonably liquid now, that new players can come in, you can write derivatives contracts, you can use it. So we don't have an answer as of now for that. Okay.
If I may, perhaps the function of the market making, or priority rather, for the first few years is not to deliver liquidity, is to get the market moving in the first place, and the investors who are participating are looking for longevity and the long contract durations. rather than short trading cycles of securities, right?
Yes.
Correct, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And maybe in 5 years' time, liquidity will become a pertinent point and an issue as more and more investors are dipping in and out. But I think right now, initially, anyone who's investing in the market making is looking for longevity.
Yes, and as Sumit correctly pointed out, the more standardized you make it, the more liquid it will start become. Yeah, because then you're trading the same thing. There are no individual moments. Yes.
To add to your point, sir, I think one of the I would call a market liquid when I want something and I went to the market and I found it and I bought it and I used it. Market is liquid when it is available when I want it, and if there is enough of it happening, then we know that there is enough players. I mean, it will only happen when there are enough players, or when there is a certain number of players, but they have enough inventory which is available for people to buy. So a market becomes illiquid when I want to sell something and there is no buyer, or when somebody wants to buy and there is nobody to sell. I think if we can get to that point of flow, I want something, I went to the market, I bought it, it's a liquid market. I mean, I think that's where it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but I think in most cases we can sort of, without a definition, we can get to that.
The American view of I want what I want when I want it at the price I want. Okay. Now that can happen for a McDonald's burger or a Coke, but that's very unlikely for an industrial product which has longevity, long-term contracts. But we would like it. We should have the flexibility. Need not be as illiquid as real estate market. That yes, I want it, but then it takes time to kind of do. But you take your point. Each market will have some reasonable expectations about their own liquidity. It can never be like US Treasury bill.
Again, the NEBP and TTF LNG market can be our inspiration here for, I guess, two reasons. One is related with, it's true that most of the natural gas that's trade, it's long-term market. We have all the contracts, and usually they are even longer contracts. Historically, the contracts were 20 years. Why the liquidity or the price, the market, the short-term market is important? It's because it gives a price index and it gives adjustment. So I guess that's the two elements that it's important when you think about the market, because you can have just long-term contracts, and many industries work on that. There are many industries that everything is related with long-term contracts. What makes this market interesting or important is to have a price. Because one of the things when you discuss on hydrogen, the big issue is that we don't have a price. So that's a little bit, it's important to facilitate contracts, to decrease transaction costs, and to accelerate the industry. So that's a little bit, I guess, one of the elements. And what with the price, they are not doing the price for the whole industry. It's the marginal price. I think the LNG gas price is really interesting, because what NEBP did, it was they was the kind of the last resort to buying gas when the market go up and the market go down, and all the countries start to index their price that historically was indexed on oil. It become to give the index on this LNG. If they are not buying from this NEBP, they are not buying from UK, but they use it because in the case they are not use it, they could sell. So they decrease the risk when you have a market and you have this index price. And the interesting, I guess, maybe for the future, I stopped talking, but the interesting to see how the liquidity went on the indexation of the NEBP price went to the TTF in Europe. Why this is interesting? Because basically you have different indicators. One, it was how much of the market was based on this indicator, and how much trade it was. And you see how the indicators is changing, and how after the market follows the international contract follows that. And just an example, Brazil was not supplying their gas from NEBP, but as they need the gas to adjust on their own natural gas market, many of the contracts were based on this international price. I guess when you are thinking on hydrogen, the idea of indicators, international gas market pricing, It's not for the whole contract. The contract will be bilateral contracts and people want that. But for decreasing the risk, I need to decrease the transaction cost. And that's a little bit what was said also before by Professor Narayan, that if I'm not using it, how I will be adjusting? Or if I need a little bit more, how will be adjusted? So this process of adjustment, I guess that's important when you think about marginal prices and marginal market for energy in general.
And Michelle, just to add on that, I think there's also a function of disinformation. You mentioned market pricing. There's a lot of disinformation being peddled by aggressive developers who are saying, well, the cost of hydrogen is $1 a kilo, which, I'll say it openly, is utter nonsense, right? We're talking about cost, the price points at which a hydrogen is delivered or at the point of consumption. That's what matters the most, and not just the cost of production. So there's a lot of aggressive lowballing of indicators or pricing bids, which is not useful to anyone, right? In the market. So the market also plays a function of highlighting disinformation, right, and filtering that out, so that there's integrity and authenticity to what the prevailing price points are. Great, thank you.
I think Michelle made a very interesting point that till the time hydrogen market develops, we can use LNG as there is a basis risk in hedging. But LNG is a well-developed market, positively correlated with hydrogen. So if you want to hedge some of the risks using contracts on LNG, it would be better than not having contract at all in terms of going unhedged vis-a-vis partially hedged with a basis risk. Basis is the price of hydrogen and LNG may not go together. Somebody was mentioning that I'm not a technological person in this industry, but the density of LNG is much higher than the density of hydrogen. So I don't know what that means, but that means these two are have different, maybe British thermal value of per kilo of the fuel. So if anybody knows about it as to what this the energy density difference does, I would learn something new.
Who wants to go?
It's the volume of the energy by volume, and after the energy by molecule. That's there is two different measures. Basically, it's how much volume you need of for having the hydrogen with the same value. If you think about the volume, the hydrogen, you need more volume than LNG. But if you think by molecule, you need less hydrogen by the same amount of energy. So that's a little bit sometimes confusing, but that's the two different levels of. And why is it important? Because of the infrastructure that we just mentioned, the pipeline, the storage, and all these things. It makes costly this process, and what probably will make the hub still more important.
The calorific value bit in the weight, as Michelle said, the weight equivalent is that 1 kilo of hydrogen is actually 10 times more calorific value, but the volume of 1 kilo of hydrogen is extraordinary. So you have to bring it down in high pressure of 700 bar, and when you bring it to 700 bar, the technology required to store it and transport it changes completely. And so that's the downside. But you'll pretty much people are solving that problem separately. Different people are solving that problem.
Great. One sort of question for which we touched upon, everyone spoke about, which is the willingness to pay. How do we kind of bring carbon financing into it in a manner that it moves the needle, right? Because ultimately someone has to bite the bullet, right? And if you rely on government balance sheets, the governments don't have that kind of liquidity anywhere in the world. So so how do we use market making as a fulcrum around which carbon financing can come into play?
Yeah, I guess one thing that was discussed here a lot about the certification. One way is that we need to harmonize more what I mean by hydrogen and how much carbon I have, because depending on the way you do your certification, you can be halfway on the process of carbon account for. So that's one thing. And another thing, it's, I guess, the aggregation. I guess you mentioned it, and I think it's something important, and the kind of finance based on results. I guess finance based on results need to be structuring the way that we can put out together the definition of the standards and the hydrogen and the aggregation of the carbon finance. That's and then I believe development institutions can work, because they have been work on this kind of thing already, and probably there is a lot of climate finance, right? So part of this climate funds and the flow of climate funds that we're expecting, and they have been discussing the COPs, the many COPs, could be drive to this kind of project, but it needs to be a clear structure, and it's why doing really specific local market making need to be harmonized with the international rules and international structures to decrease the transaction cost. I'm always worried when you have different, and there's a trade-off, because when you work with the country's market, you have specificities and you have the standards. But if you do it too specific, after you have a big transaction cost to use international market to attract this capital.
Yeah, and I think that's where when we started looking at the market, we realized that maybe the technology is similar, but the market, we need to link these markets up. We also need to link it to the carbon markets, because from what we saw, that the carbon credits and IRA credits are essentially a loyalty point coming out of my platform. We are the hydrogen market, not the carbon market, but the carbon market plays a big role in financing the hydrogen market. So we need to allow the network of carbon exchanges to come together. Whatever is produced over here should be traded in any of the other carbon exchanges. The carbon exchanges we don't need to bring everybody together into one carbon exchange. They can work in with their own set of network customers, but they need to be able to look at the inventories, look at the price volatilities between these markets, and get some stability in that market as well, because that market also has seen a lot of volatility in price. And because the markets are not linked to each other, I mean, what happens in Australia versus what happens in South America or the US. So we need to start looking at a structure where you have got these decentralized players who have got API access into each other, and there's a platform which allows it. The platform doesn't own anything; they just own the APIs. Just like we want the open market, open network to make that happen, and that's what we are taking a fundamentally different route to get to this, saying that instead of we becoming the central hub, create the network, let other people join into this network, and they make their own money when they do it, but they just use the same protocol, because more the merrier. The more carbon exchanges coming together, it is better for everybody. More hydrogen players coming is better for everybody. Trying to create localized structures we don't have today we don't have I would say enough size in each market to justify a market player. So the world has to become the stage for it to justify that. That's the size that will justify a technology investment or a structure. And anyway, I'll stop there. But I think I completely agree with Michelle, and also with you on what needs to happen of linking the carbon markets together to solve this problem.
And if I just indulge a little bit further on that point, Sumit, the complexity that's needed for harmonization, interplay between different segments in the domestic market and international markets, is it then better, and I think Michelle mentioned take it, and Rory mentioned take it step by step, is it better that when we develop the hydrogen markets in India, we take an over-the-counter approach initially, not compromising the integrity of those trades, whilst we are building these interplays and APIs into the other market segments.
I think over-the-counter will absolutely be something that we need to cater to. The forwards contracts would be bidirectional, bilateral deals that are going to happen over the next 2 years. We are not going to see too much of trading and exchanging happening. We will see parties, but once they are on the platform doing these transactions, the information becomes stable, and we know that the network is growing. Even though it is two parties who have done it together, we know how the harmonization is going to happen on the network. So I think over the next year and a half, we are going to see these bidirectional forwards contracts define what the standardization is going to lead to. And I don't think governments, while they can play a role, it is the industry that needs to come together and agree that makes sense for them. I think Rory mentioned that they didn't participate because of some rules that came in. And finally, like oil, governments don't play a role. They can just do policy, but at the end of the day, it is a private party who buys from another private party, and the two private parties need to agree. And we have to create markets for private parties to play. And governments, as you said, don't have the balance sheet to become the market makers. They don't have the balance sheet to keep, and they certainly are not technologically advanced like the industry to keep ahead of the thing. Policy is always lagging behind where technology and what to governments are going to do. So we need to allow market mechanisms to determine policy, to determine how the markets are going to go instead of policy determining it. If policy is determining the market, we are already too late.
I think the question is not policy determining the market, is who's funding the gap, right?
Yeah.
And at the moment, no private party is going to fund that gap, right? So ultimately, that's the role of the government, is to give that stability, to give the guarantee of contracting over a longer horizon, right? And then get out of the way, and then let the markets take over, which is how pretty much all commodity trades have started. Like if you look at solar, everyone in India was not wanting to fund contracts other than the state of Gujarat in the initial days, right? Because of the counterparty risk, and the government said, no, we can't allow that to happen. So we bring in sub-sovereign entities like SECI and NTPC to play that crucial role, right? So ultimately, the backstop will remain with the governments, and has to remain with the governments, because no one else is funding that gap. So I think that's the role they're playing. But point well taken on the efficiency and the speed of execution, where I think commercial actors have to kick in. Michelle, you have a follow-on comment or point?
Yeah, I guess two things. One, it's this relation between the carbon price and the willingness to pay, because actually, when you talk about this willingness to be green, let's say the people, they should be looking the carbon price, and they are doing their own estimation and the risks relate about what they expect to be the green premium. So it can be a green premium on the market, or it can be a niche market. That's basically when you have the obligation to be. So this willingness to, as it was mentioned about the data, about the steel, it depends a lot on how they are seeing their competition and the market that will be evolving, but also how they are seeing the obligations and the carbon price in the future. So this development of the market, they are already interacting. We can design it to interact well, but they are already interacting, because when the people pay the green premium, they should be, and they are, the stakeholders looking about the expectation of the carbon price in the future. I guess that's a point I want to raise. And the other thing, I guess that's also important, is this relationship between the harmonization of the carbon price that Sumit was talking, because and how it could evolve. I guess when you institutionalize something, you create a path dependence, an institutional path dependence. So it's important also to see how the market will be evolving, to not create something that can be a barrier for the market development. So maybe, as you said, to have some forward contracts and see how markets evolve, it's also important. I guess as you said, the moment on when you are creating the rule and harmonize, it's also important in this process. I'm always afraid to create some rules, some designs that are after they can become a kind of a lock-in situation as well. So that's something it's tricky because we need to move, because if you don't move, there is nothing. But you need to be careful about to not create too restrictive rules that does not allow that create a kind of a locking situation afterwards.
And or stifles market participation, as Rory mentioned, that they didn't participate because the rules were very elusive, right, and restrictive, and favoring a certain segment, because I guess the market makers wanted a surety that there will be participation. So I think before the execution, there has to be some sense check or dipstick analysis as to how many people are willing to participate in the market, and that's also what we are advocating, right? That government of India and others should do. So, Michelle, final word from you.
I just want to underline what Rory said. It's really amazing to see all the work that you have been doing in India. I guess it's a really interesting market. We're really, from international perspective, we're following, and we believe it's a really interesting market because you have potential intern demand, but also potential to actually interact with international market. So what you're doing, it's something that can be also used and actually expanded internationally. So congrats for everybody that's working on that. And yeah, you are following close. And if you can help anyhow, here you are.
Thanks, Michelle. And as I said right at the beginning, the work we do in India is just as applicable to other economies, both in developing and developed nations. So yeah, very, very open in sharing everything, and that's the purpose of these workshops. So thank you to you, Michelle, for taking out the time. Sumit, last words from you.
Thank you, Sanmit, for the opportunity. I think there's a lot happening, and I think what we are seeing is the theory or the premise with which we started the work is getting validated by every workshop that you are doing, or every conversation that we are having with the players, is that there is a need. The need is here and now, that we need to start doing. It will mature over the next year, 2 years time. It doesn't need to be solved today. There's a whole lot of people who are solving different parts of the problem. And we keep getting asked that, how will you do this and how will you do that? I said, I don't need to solve that problem. The world has decided that hydrogen is there to stay. The world has decided that hydrogen is going to play a major role in decarbonization. And we know the different players are all so we need to create a platform which allows all the players to have a level playing field in there, instead of restrictive playgrounds. Create an open playground so that people can come and create the market. All open playgrounds have actually over time and again, open playgrounds have created a better market than closed playgrounds. So our fundamental premise is to create an open playground in multiple markets. Let the rules develop, let the certifications develop, let the governments have a say, because as soon as you say that you will do something monopolistic, they will put barriers which will prevent every other market to play. So we want to start off with the premise that create open markets, allow government participation, because they are a major player in stabilizing, as you're saying. Let them be a player in there and create the facility for all of us to succeed over the next 5 to 6 years is very, very important for this industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumit. Narayan, final words from you.
Reminds me to some extent of the Human Genome Project, where the DNA mapping was being done collectively across the countries, and which is what Sumit said, that there is a general driving force behind towards this, and different people will will solve different problems. And the way one thinks about is when I'm driving from London to Scotland and to avoid the traffic, if I'm driving at night, I don't see the entire path up to Scotland. I know which side, Highlands, where do I want to go. But the headlights of the car show me next 60 yards. And when I go to the 60 yards, I see the next one and whether there are blockages or whether there is traffic jam. And I think that's the approach we are doing. We know that it's the right thing to do. And this open platform idea is essential. And at some point, some kind of regulatory arbitrage, whether it's pink or green or blue, will come in, but that's at a later stage. That should not stop us from going the way we are going. And yourself and your team is doing phenomenal efforts to put this together and bringing everybody together and have that as a body of knowledge that can be accessed by all players, producers, consumers, government, regulators, whatever. So this is hats off to you and congratulations for putting all this hard work, you and the team. Nishant is also smiling. He says, "You don't know, sir, how much work we are putting in," and the others as well. So well done. Keep it up, please. Yeah, keep it up.
Thank you. There's always chaos behind the screen, so which Nishant and I know very well of. But thank you to you, Narayan and Michelle and Sumit and Rory, who's had to leave for a meeting, for your contributions and expert advice. I think the one resounding message is that as much as the goal looks difficult or Mount Kailash, Narayan, as you say, but I think with the help of technology and the force multiplication, we can scale that mountain, right? And the idea is to share that knowledge. And one of the previous discussions we had, it was mentioned that the knowledge is commonly available, but it may be commonly available, but it is highly fragmented and it's not packaged in a form that is consumable, right? So,
yes.
so it's like you have all the ingredients and you all have the recipes, but ultimately there are very few master chefs out there. So essentially, our role is being that master chef in packaging the knowledge and applying. And this brings to a very important point. So when we finish the workshop series, and the workshop series culminate in our summit next month, the Climate and Energy Transition Finance Summit in Delhi on 28th and 29th of November, soon thereafter we move into implementation mode. So we'll have a library of structures, instruments, and knowledge available online. And we'll have a forum where projects such as market making will get activated. So a number of you have already started to send your contributions on what projects should India and other developing countries activate. And it's not just about producing hydrogen. We know that production of hydrogen, that mountain and bump we have scaled, but it's getting from point A to B, where the flow of hydrogen is seamless, continuous, unrestricted, unencumbered, and financed. Most importantly, that's eventually the goal of what we are doing. So thank you for the encouraging words, Narayan, and everyone. Thank you, everyone. Nishant, over to you to do a final wrap.
No, fantastic. I think this was a very good discussion, and we've gone over time, and I think we can keep going. But also a very complicated subject. And, big thanks to all the market experts who would come in here. Rory, Michelle, thanks for coming in last minute. And I got your email about 6 a.m. India time. And we were very glad to have you. And I think you were a very important part of this whole discussion today. But like Sanmit alluded to, we are having the summit on the 28th and 29th of November. We'd love for everyone to be a part of it. And only now we are opening up the workshops to a lot more stakeholders. But to give you an idea, between the DFIs that participate in our workshops quite regularly, the World Bank and the ADB people are here until the very last minute. And between all of the DFIs, they have more than $250 to $300 billion. And some of our members who participate regularly, including Reliance, Acme, and Renew and Avada, they've committed more than $30 billion. So we do have a good concentration of stakeholders, but it's been difficult getting everyone to the table. And I appreciate everyone who's recognizing these efforts, because we've spoken to SECI, And it was unfortunate we didn't get a response from them in time. But I think by the summit on the 28th and 29th, we can promise you it'll be a very good event. And it'll be a culmination of all of these experts across these various subjects. And there is a parallel track that is focused on market making on day 2 of the session. If you want more information on the summit, please just email me. We'll be making public announcements early next week. But we'd love to have your organization be a part of the summit. If you want to partner with us, let us know. If you want to come on board as a speaker, we'll send across an invitation very soon. But if you're interested, please drop me a line. And thank you everyone who stayed here until the end. And I look forward to seeing you guys at the next workshop on next Wednesday, the 25th at 9:30 a.m. India time. We have representation from MEGA, and even AIIB and EDB is looking to send across some of their subject matter experts on the topic. So looking forward to seeing all of you all there. And thank you once again for joining us today.